for Monumental.
In the light of all the statues being damaged by Antifa, BLM, BAMN, and so on, all the monumental madness, this hysteria over sculptures in the wake of Charlottesville and so on, I'd like to remind people of another group that engaged in just this sort of activity decades ago when they partially destroyed one of the most iconic sculptures ever. The far-left activist group turned terrorist group, the Weathermen, later renamed the Weather Underground to be more tolerant of other genders, among other things, blew up government buildings.
At 1 minute before 1 o'clock this morning, the switchboard at the Capitol received a phone call. A man's voice said a bomb would go off in the building in half an hour. At 1:30 in the morning, it did, in a small, unmarked restroom on the ground floor of the Senate side, next to a barber shop and near several small offices, including one committee hearing room. Credit for the Capitol bombing was claimed in a letter received by the Associated Press today, signed by the Weather Underground.
Ho Chi Minh's birthday was also marked in Washington. A bomb exploded early this morning in the Pentagon, and left-wing terrorists telephoned newspapers to say they were responsible. Stephen Gear reports.
The explosion destroyed one of the Pentagon's 140 women's restrooms and blasted out a wall on the 4th floor. No one was injured. The explosion came at 1 a.m., just moments after the Pentagon's duty officer received a warning based on one of a number of calls to newspapers, one of which said the Pentagon would be bombed in celebration of Ho Chi Minh's birthday.
People calling themselves members of the Weather Underground last night planted bombs in federal office buildings in Washington and Oakland, California.
That other bomb threat was a dramatic one at a military induction center in Oakland, California today.
At midday, the Associated Press got a phone call from a man saying he was with the Weather Underground and that bombs would explode at the Departments of Interior and Agriculture and the Smithsonian before the day was out.
A federal grand jury in Detroit today charged the 13 top leaders of the Weathermen with plotting to bomb public buildings in Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Berkeley, California. The Weathermen are the militant faction of the Students for a Democratic Society. Only one of the 13 is now in custody.
The Weathermen took their name from the line in the song Subterranean Homesick Blues, where Bob Dylan sings, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." By the way, in this video, Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg, the famous beat poet who is back there playing a Hasidic rabbi, are in Greenwich Village here. I could say from personal experience, it's a cute little area of New York City, and it's basically New York City's version of the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. It's sort of a hippie, hipster, freak central kind of place. And this is the same neighborhood in which the Weather Underground, ironically, accidentally blew up their hideout. They were stockpiling explosives. Who knows what victims they may have killed with that dynamite had they not blown themselves up. A couple of them died in that explosion, by the way. Besides the more obvious similarities between this terrorist group and the terrorist groups Antifa, BAMN, No, and etc., there are some less obvious ones. The Weather Underground's expressed intention to exist was to take down the U.S. government, quote, by any means necessary, unquote. Of course, the current group BAMN stands for by any means necessary, which is a reference to Malcolm X's use of this phrase.
By any means necessary.
By which he meant violence. And then there is the similarity between them of damaging statues.
The Weathermen fanned the flames just before the days of rage by blowing up a statue honoring Chicago policemen.
Now we have an out-and-out defiant gesture by groups that have come in here to upset the city, and we wonder now what will happen. Now it's a statue. Will it be a policeman performing his duty tomorrow, or what?
One of the most famous statues ever, Auguste Rodin's The Thinker. The Journal for the American Institute for Conservation, Volume 37, Number 2, published 1998, included this article titled, 25 Years After the Bomb, Maintaining Cleveland's The Thinker, by Bruce Christman, which reads, quote, in 1970, the museum's Thinker was blown up by radical protesters, unquote. Then, in Section 3, titled Explosion March 24, 1970, it reads, quote, "In the early morning hours of March 24, 1970, dynamite was placed between the legs of the thinker. The results were devastating." Then he referred to Figure 3, which is this here. "The base and the lower part of the legs were annihilated, and the remaining sculpture was knocked off its pedestal. The thinker lay face down, apparently contemplating hell much more directly." You see, when Rodin initially made this, and also the Kiss, and other sculptures, these were all going to be part of one group, which was to be depictions of scenes from Dante's Inferno. The thinker was supposed to be Dante himself, looking down into hell and contemplating this all. Later on, Auguste Rodin dissociated these pieces and made them more independent pieces. The blast sent pieces of bronze flying, causing damage to the building approximately 20 yards away. The bronze doors of the museum were dented, the marble columns were chipped. This damage can be seen to this day. Pieces of bronze were even found on the roof. According to the Cleveland Police Department, this act of terrorism was conducted by a radical weatherman group operating in Cleveland. Members of the group later moved to New York City, where they were killed by making explosives. Unquote. You can see a lot of this destruction on your screen right there. And by the way, yes, that is actor Dustin Hoffman right there. He lived in the neighborhood at the time. It is a very high-rent area, and famous people have been living there since the 60s. As the Cleveland Museum of Art says, no one was arrested for this act of destruction. This just in the middle of making this video, I took a quick break to watch this video by Amber Cummings, aka Based Tranny, in which, in a happy coincidence, she pointed out yet another similarity between the Weather Underground and Antifa/BAMN, and etc. Number one, their complete lack of planning of what they would do if they finally succeeded, and number two, their willingness to engage in mass murder. Murder of millions of capitalists and other infidels, bourgeoisie, just like all the other communist revolutions of history. Real communism has never been tried. Actually, it's been tried, it just fails over and over again, and every time it's tried, millions of people die. Have a listen.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
So thank you, Amber, for bringing that up, for putting that in your video. Hope you're doing well. By the way, everybody, you should scroll down, click on the links to go to Amber's channel. She is a hero. She's one of the original heroes of Berkeley, and she deserves millions of subscribers. So scroll down, click the link, check out her channel. Tabby and I love you, Amber. Okay, let's move on. The Weather Underground, a far-left terrorist organization that wanted to end the U.S. government by any means necessary, kind of like Antifa. They use explosives, kind of like Antifa, although the magnitude is certainly not the same, at least not yet. They hurt their own, which Antifa often does. But what matters for the purpose and the point of this video is that both groups think that they have the special right, the elite privilege to destroy things that are not theirs. Also, it's important to learn from history, make comparisons, perceive patterns, and hopefully gain the insight and the wisdom to learn from mistakes and to evolve. So, folks, what do you think about all of this?